by the military-industrial complex.
It could be seen to move violently forward, violently forward, violently forward.
I'm just a patsy.
Let's win there.
I have a dream.
I said this once or twice, but it bears repeating. If you like your current insurance, you will keep your current insurance.
You think about the Army and the Navy and the missions they run to protect the world, they run on SAP.
You have done a really spectacular job. I guess pretty much everybody at this table is your customer, so
Exactly.
That's not so bad.
Exactly.
I want to congratulate
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Today, we have a great guest with us. David Wemhoff is not just an attorney with nearly 3 decades of experience under his belt, but he's also an educator, a historian, and an author. Holding degrees from the University of Notre Dame and the University of the Pacific, David's legal expertise has taken him to various federal courts, even the Supreme Court of the United States. Beyond the courtroom, he's taught courses ranging from business law to constitutional law at 2 universities. But where David truly stands out is in his writing. His research-intensive work, John Cortney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition, delves into America's Doctrinal Warfare program targeted at the Catholic Church. The timing today corresponds with the current Vatican Synod on Synodality, and some might look at this as an extension of Vatican II. David is also an active member of the Society of Catholic Social Scientists, and his keen observations are something that we're excited to delve into today. So without further ado, let's welcome David Wemhoff to the show. Thank you, David, for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so very much for having me on. I can't thank you enough, Peter. It is a great privilege to be here, and I hope that I can say some things here that can help to enlighten the audience about what's going on, not just in Rome, but around the world.
Yeah, it's great, and like I said earlier, David has written these 2 volumes. I'm just holding one of them up here now with the title. It took me a long time to memorize: John Cortney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. And I just wanted to start off with a couple of foundational questions, and that's because the definition of words and their meaning is part of the doctrinal warfare space. So before we get too deep into this, what do we actually mean by the terms doctrinal warfare and the American Proposition?
Well, those are good questions. And but before I start off, if you can memorize this book's title, you're doing better than most, I think.
Well, I've talked about it so many times. The first dozen times that I started to mention the book, I did it on my show, and I was embarrassed because I couldn't remember the whole thing. So I committed myself to memorizing it. But it's funny because I think that in the foreword or the introduction, there's actually somebody wrote about what a great title it was.
That may have been Dr. John Rao. He is an academic and a writer, and someone for whom I have a great deal of respect. Okay, doctrinal warfare and the American Proposition. What are we talking about?
Yeah,
we're talking about basically using ideas to change doctrine, and it is supposed to. The program was, and I think it still is. It just changed the name to ideological warfare. Is supposed to target what they call opposition systems, that is, belief systems that are at odds with the American system of values and social organization. Because our system, our society is a liberal society. It is, with a capital L, it is based on an ideology. It is based on a set of ideas. And these ideas are at odds with many other ideas in the world. And so what you had with the Doctrinal Warfare program, which really came to be systematized and prioritized by the U.S. government by 1953, what you had with that program was a way to take a look at what they called opposition systems, anything really for that matter, to include the communists, because the Soviet communists were the big threat at the time, but any system out there. And they list a number of them, super nationalism, other things. These were all targets to basically have their doctrine changed or corrupted so that the intellectuals, the leaders in those societies, in those groups, would come to accept American values, the American ideology, which underlays America, as the ideal, or at least as good, and we can justify it and go along with it. That was what the Doctrinal Warfare program ultimately was designed to do. And to do that, it needed doctrine, it needed ideas, it needed words, it needed people to push these words. And it had to also be further systematized in the sense that you had to come up with something called the American proposition. And the American proposition explains what it's about a 20-page talk. It explains.
And that was written by Henry Luce?
Actually, that was written by John Cortney Murray.
Oh, John Cortney. Okay.
He wrote it and he gave it to Henry Luce.
Right.
And Henry Luce made some changes and waxed very happy with it.
Right.
So this was the American proposition was the doctrinal package that says America is not only good, but it's also the ideal. And so what the Doctrinal Warfare program did and what the U.S. government did, working with the mainstream media, okay, and with big business, what they did was to target the major religions of the world. Now, I only wrote about one. And of course, they targeted other groups too, but they targeted all the major religions, country by country, Islam, Hindu, whatever. But the Catholics were the big ones. They were really important, and that is what my book focuses on. And as you go through the declassified documents, you see that the government was identifying people who could be helpful. Well, the reality is that the MSM, the mainstream media at the time, represented by Henry Luce, was also identifying people who were very helpful. They were kind of ahead of the government. The private industry, the media, finance, they're ahead of the government usually, but there's a troika. And that is the mainstream media, the financial or industrial elites, and then finally, the government, the intel agencies. They all kind of work together, and they all work together to get this idea out there that America is not only good, but it is the ideal. And that's where Murray came in, and this was 9 years before Vatican II. And the idea is to change these societies, not just change their doctrine, but actually change the societies.
So if I understand this correctly, there's an American doctrine, and then there's a religious doctrine, in this case, the Catholic Church. And one of the things that I talk about on this show a lot is that a lot of people, I asked a couple of months ago, I asked a dozen very smart people in a private room if they knew the difference between liberty and freedom. And all of these people were college educated, all of them high IQ people. None of them could tell me the difference between the word liberty and the word freedom. And as I understand it, liberty is freedom within limits, as in a ship pulls into a harbor and the captain of the ship gives the crew liberty. He allows them to leave the ship for a certain amount of time, and then they can come back. And that John Adams famously said that that the Constitution was designed for a religious and moral people, and that is because that if government guarantees a certain amount of liberty, then you need the culture to be able to constrain the freedom at which people live their lives, and that's kind of the purpose of something like a religion like the Catholic Church. And so freedom is often used as a cudgel to kind of destroy cultures. And that's very much kind of what I understood Murray to be doing. And so what was the threat to Catholic doctrine by the American doctrine? Because I think that most people who are watching this probably think American doctrine is cool. It's life, liberty. It's the pursuit of happiness. It's what's wrong with that? How do you reconcile this collision here?
Those are good questions, and that's a question that's going to take a long answer, but that's okay.
Okay.
I mean, the idea now of freedom is definitely corrupted from what it was meant to be. Liberty has been turned into what I call liberation from freedom, which means that to understand freedom properly, you have to do what's right. That's freedom. That frees you from doing error. But what liberty has become, it has become just the opposite of that. It is to do whatever you want. It's license, in other words. It is license. The liberal order and the American ideology that this society is based on, and now many other societies around the globe are based on, and this has also infected the Catholic Church. The liberal order, I think, was best set forth in Thomas Paine's Common Sense, but it found its crystallization, its juridical status, if you will, in the First Amendment. And in the First Amendment, what do we have? We have, free speech, free press. Government can't restrict any of that. So religious liberty, disestablishment of churches. And
but they're negative. But they're negative freedoms. It's things that the government is not allowed to step in and legislate against. Correct?
That's correct. The federal government cannot legislate and hurt those areas. That's how the First Amendment was written. But the First Amendment also gave an enormous amount of power to private interests, and not to any church, because you didn't have an established church. And part of that was the milieu of the age, is you had a lot of different religions. People didn't really go with the established religions. But you don't have an established church, and you have a government whose powers are limited. So then the guys who are the most powerful are going to be the private interests, who then control the society. They control the culture, they even control religion, and they are a check on the government. What I think is very interesting is we've seen one of the theses of my book, where you see the mainstream media working with big business, working with the government intel agencies. We've seen that play out with the COVID story, right?
Right.
With how the government, the intel agencies went to the social media and said, this is what you got to do, A, B, and C. And now this is up in court, and the courts are, pushing back on this. But that is something that my book identified. There's this close relationship. It's always been there.
Right. And you do a great job of, I mean, Time Magazine is, for all intents and purposes, an extension of the American intelligence establishment. I mean, they seem to be in place. I mean, and it's interesting too, because in doing my research and going back and trying to identify who the main players are and kind of the secret cabal that runs the world, a really good place to start is the cover of Time Magazine, because it seems like if the establishment is pushing an agenda, it's on the cover of Time Magazine. And Skull and Bones, Henry Luce was right there, at the center of that whole thing.
He sure was. That's absolutely right. And he was, they say he was a 33-degree Mason too, but he definitely knew, excuse me, he definitely knew what the elites wanted. And he definitely knew what to advance, because he was a big fan of the Constitution and of the First Amendment. And he knows that re-engineers society. People talk about social re-engineering in the last 50 years. The original social re-engineering was the First Amendment.
Right. Now, a lot of people have this, and I think it's probably because they've been programmed this way, have the very kind of Straussian way of looking at good guys and bad guys, trying to put people into those categories. And you look at somebody like Henry Luce, and you understand that the tenor of that time was that, oh, the Soviet Union is our biggest enemy. If you start to dig into it a little bit, though, you might see that as a construct. Do you think that Henry Luce was operating in good faith in trying to do that, or do you think that he kind of thought that people who read his magazines were cattle to be controlled and manipulated?
Well, I think there was more solidarity between the elites and the people back then. That doesn't mean it was like it should be. I'm just saying there was more than there is now. Now the lack of solidarity is very clear. I think Luce actually did believe that the American proposition was the best way to go. He was tied to it because he was a Presbyterian, and the Presbyterians were very important, along with the Masons, in making sure the American Revolution happened and the First Amendment came into being. They had a very big part of that. What we're talking about here is social organization, principles of social organization. And the Catholic Church says otherwise from the First Amendment. They say, no, that is not the ideal. That may be tolerable, but that is not the ideal. And we are to work for the Catholic confessional state, which means basically the laws are based on the Catholic religion or the divine positive law, as a minimum on the natural law, as a minimum. But that is what the Catholic Church's doctrine is, and that's why it says church and state have to cooperate.
Right. And so John Cortney Murray was a Jesuit priest, a writer, a published writer, and seemed to be kind of the official voice in the United States of the opposition to what was going on. So, was this program, the American Proposition? I'll just call it the American Proposition program. Was Vatican II a direct result of that program, or were there other things going on?
Excuse me, I got a bit of a cough today.
That's okay.
John Cortney Murray was set up by Henry Luce as the progressive, as the good guy. And he was going to stand for, all the American values. And all the bad guys were set up in the media as being Ottaviani, Connell, and Fenton. And there were a few others too. But these guys were portrayed that way by Time magazine and the rest of the American media. And this is the problem we have going into today. We are only looking at the world through the eyes of the media. So how they determine who the good guys and bad guys are is how a lot of us do our thinking.
Right. Well, the reason I mentioned Leo Strauss is the entire idea that people need to either be good guys or bad guys. One of the things that I took away from your book is that when the people who were meeting at Vatican II started to read about themselves in the media, they were put into camps, right, and that they didn't even recognize as being in when right. They were. Yeah,
that's exactly right. And that's why they came up with InterMarifica. The Council Fathers of Vatican II were really upset, to put it mildly, with what they were reading in the American media. And so they wrote InterMarifica was one of the first two documents that came out in the autumn of 1963. And guess who opposed InterMarifica? John Cortney Murray, right. and all the so-called, pro-liberal. They're the ones who oppose it, especially a lot of American Catholic leaders, because it said basically the media should be controlled by the church and state. That's what it said.
Well, it's interesting too, because it presents this, it's using these Straussian terms to create these kind of Hegelian dialectics, right? Where you're trying to create good guys and bad guys because you're trying to move the needle in one direction or the other. And one of the things that my wife and I have noticed popping up, reactionary, it's funny because sidebar, I'm very familiar with this kind of like being categorized. I met Andrew Breitbart in 2010, and he was saying politics is downstream from culture. And the way that I got involved in all of this stuff is that I used to be a photographer, and I started taking pictures in a previous career. And I started taking pictures of people that were saying things that I agreed with and making them look good. And the New York Times painted me as the Annie Leibovitz of the alt-right, which I found hysterical because, among other things, I've had clients, the Simon Wiesenthal Center and the Shoah Foundation Institute. So, calling me a Nazi doesn't stick. It doesn't stick very well.
Right.
But there's always this tendency to try to create reactions in people in order to create reactionary movements.
Right.
And right now we've got the sedevacantism. You've got people on YouTube that have some kind of credibility, claiming that the chair of St. Peter is empty, and then this creates this. To me, I just see it as it's a rock being dropped into a pond to see where the ripples go out.
Oh, I think you're right, Peter. I
yeah.
think that's absolutely right. I think with the whole sedevacantist argument is meant to divide. It's
Right.
meant to divide the church, so that the church can't get it together and really do what it's supposed to do. Okay, and the whole sedevacantist argument is something that has got a lot of people all spun up, like you said. But the thing is that argument came about because suddenly the church became like America. See, because America is the ideal society, so everybody should have their say, right?
Right.
And so as a result, you don't have the prelates and the priests cracking down on these guys. Now, what you do have is they will only endorse, certain magazines or whatever, and let them use their name. That's what you do have. So if you are out there and you're listening to these people argue about sedevacantism or whatever, you got to say, you know what? If the hierarchy doesn't approve of this, it's just their opinion.
Right. Right. And to your point, I think that if you understand that the reaction is what they're looking for,
right,
then you need to be proactive, not reactive. Like you need to act. And you started off by saying something too, again, in this kind of word warfare space that we live in, that, and now I've lost my thought, reacting to words.
Well, this is Saul Alinsky like, isn't it?
Yeah.
Action, reaction, isn't it?
Right.
That's what they're implementing at the highest levels to get so we're off balance.
I remember what I was going to say. Ideology.
Right.
Okay. The Catholic Church is based on an ideology. Religions are based on an ideology, and there's a term. It's used as a thought. Robert Lifton would call it a thought terminating cliche, which is, he's just an ideologue. Well, an ideologue is somebody who has ideas, who believes in those ideas, and to turn it into a pejorative, to turn it into a negative thing, is just an attempt to turn it into a pejorative comment and end the discussion at that point, as opposed to, okay, well, what are the ideas that people believe in, and what are we actually having disagreements about?
Well, I don't think all ideas are equal. Excuse me. And I think the Catholic Church has its doctrine and its dogma, which is revealed religion. And that goes outside of the realm of an ideology, I would submit. An ideology is a set of ideas that have to find their existence and perpetuate themselves in what is going on. They can also reorder that society, but that may not necessarily be the truth. Religion, the Catholic religion, is the one true faith. It is complete. It has everything. And that is how society should be ordered. And it does so for the proper end of man, that each person can achieve their vocation, which is to see God in the next life and to live a good life in this life. That's why you need the common good to be controlled by the government and the church. And the common good deals with this issue of keeping things in society on an even keel. In other words, having an efficacious conjoining of all the different aspects of civil society, so that salvation becomes, becomes easier, more likely. And
Right.
This was something that, as you point out in our earlier discussion, how Murray talked about the common good as not being the concern of the civil authorities, but it is a concern of civil authorities, and the church has always said that. So what you had Murray and the Anglo-American system of social organization, liberalism, at war with the Catholic Church's view of ordering societies. And the Catholic Church does not, the Catholic Church doesn't say, well, democracies or republics are bad. It just says, and the form of government doesn't matter. Kings, queens, emperors, dictators, doesn't matter, as long as they follow the divine positive law, or at least the natural law.
Yeah, one of the things that I had that I struggled with doing a little bit, and I did wind up using ChatGPT to help me out, is that my friend Vox Day, in reference to Jordan Peterson, made up this neologism called baffle garble, which is a form of nonsensical speech that uses lots of words and concepts to kind of confuse people.
That's John Cortney Murray.
And that's John. Yes. And it was funny because when I was reading, I would, in your book, my wife and I read it out loud to each other. And when we would get to his diatribes, we would start reading it to each other and then just scratching our heads saying, what did he say? Like,
Yeah, that is very insightful, Peter, because that's exactly what he did. He just wrote stuff. It's like, what does he mean? Right. And contrast that with Father Connell, who wrote so simply.
Right, but that was a trap too, because one of the things that I noticed is that the responses to Murray from Connell and Fenton, I think Connell and Fenton are those the two guys, was that they tried to answer his arguments on the merit on each point, and that's a trap. In neurolinguistic programming, they have something called chunking up, which is that you need to go back to the meta level in order to kind of look at the argument on its whole. Maybe you do this in court too, if you're an attorney, but it seemed like a trap that they were in, because they were trying to argue each point that he was making, and his points were nonsensical. So trying to analyze each piece of nonsense and calling it out as nonsense seemed to be a giant waste of time. But not only that, if you understand that the audience is the same people who are reading the pro and con arguments in two different publications, what you wind up doing is just confusing the audience to the point where they throw their hands up and they don't actually know what the argument is, that they don't know what they're arguing about.
So they're going to go with the guy who's on the cover of Time magazine. That's what they're going to do. And that was John Cortney Murray.
Right.
But a couple of good things that that Connell did do is he said, Murray's arguments simply do not deal with all the possibilities. He did that more than once. And Shea was another one from Monsignor Shea was another one. And he refuted a lot what Murray said. He said, all Murray is talking about is that we're supposed to follow the natural law, and that the Anglo-American system is from the natural law. And he said, well, why did it take 18 centuries to pop up?
Right, exactly. I don't know if we got a direct answer. So do you think that Vatican II was a direct result of this American proposition program? And then were there things that were unfinished? And is that what we're dealing with now with the Synod on synodality?
As to your first question, excuse me, I don't think Vatican II was created by the Doctrinal Warfare program of the United States. What you had, I think John the 23rd legitimately called it because he had some issues he wanted to deal with. Father Connell and others submitted issues dealing with the proper form of societal organization, the principles of societal organization. I think that's why he called it. But you got to understand that the American elites and the elites anywhere are pretty flexible. They can take situations and turn them to their advantage very rapidly. It's that old saying, don't let a good crisis go to waste. I mean, they're very flexible. They're able to take a situation, run with it. And when the Vatican announced Vatican II, I mean, C.D. Jackson was just rubbing his hands with glee. I mean, he saw an opportunity here because then the media could go in there and make the good guys and the bad guys. Now, what happened in the course of the council were some missteps by John the 23rd. And then what you also had then is the American media coming up with the spirit of Vatican II. And this is a doctrinal weapon itself. Michael Novak actually did this. I think it came from him in the fall of 1964. The spirit of Vatican II was basically to spin all the documents and all the ideas into an Americanist view, which is to support the American view.
But I think that you point out in the book too that just using the word spirit is kind of a magical incantation.
Oh, it is. It is.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. No, that's exactly right. And so what they were doing is they were taking this idea and saying, well, Vatican II is something that it really wasn't. And I don't think people understand Vatican II today. You'll see a lot of Catholics saying, well, Vatican II was a complete rupture with the past. Well, no, really, it wasn't. I mean, and I'm not a liturgist. I'm not an ecclesiologist. I can't talk to that. But what I can talk to is I can talk to the social doctrine, especially Gaudium et Spes, Dignitas Humanae, and Inter Mirifica. And those were a continuation. But you have a bigger question here. You have to ask people, which is something that Ratzinger asked, is do you believe in the hermeneutic of continuity or the hermeneutic of rupture? And that's a matter of the heart. But what the American media said is that Vatican II was a rupture. What the Americans found out is they weren't getting what they wanted in the documents. Inter Mirifica was one of them. They didn't get what they wanted, so they ignored it. They didn't get what they wanted in Dignitas Humanae, so they spun it in the first version. And
we're still living with that now.
Oh, we still are.
Right, yeah,
the spirit of Vatican II still runs through the church. And I think the prelates, in large measure, still hold to that spirit of Vatican II. And I think that's what's driving the Synod in large measure. And the spirit of Vatican II is an alien spirit. It is an Americanist spirit. It's a heretical spirit. It is the spirit that plays to the powers of the day. What you got to understand, or what people got to understand, is that the First Amendment, the American ideology, the liberal order, is about giving power, giving power to the powerful, to the socioeconomic elites, to the plutocracy, as I call it. That's what it's ultimately about. It floats a lot of boats, keep people quiet, gives them a few other things, but it's ultimately about concentrating power.
And do you think that the founding fathers knew that when they created it?
I do. Yeah, I think they do. I think they did. Yeah. My research and my studying on it with Elbridge Gerry, James Randolph, these guys understood the power of the press and disestablished churches. They didn't want that. They didn't want established churches. They didn't want control of press. I'm sorry.
Well, and it seems like control of story has his story. Like I said, I'm writing my own book right now, and it seems like story control is and history control. Orwell wasn't saying anything new when he was talking about that stuff. The stories that people learn, the information, the language that's being used in order to frame people's reality is a paramount importance to the people who want to maintain a power structure. I don't think that it's an accident, for example, that Gutenberg was a goldsmith before he invented the printing press, because he was in that group of people who were they were the moneyed elite, right? And so control of the words, control of, and in fact, it's arguable that the Gutenberg press was, kind of like the first attack on the Catholic Church, right? Taking the liturgy, printing it in many different languages, changing translations, doing things like that. It's curious. So,
the church tried to control that with forbidden books. It did that for a long time, and then that went out.
And the king tried to control it. You had to, in England, you had to have a license to have a printing press. So control of the language, control of the way that people frame stories is an old one. And so this is not something we talked about before. So do you think that there's a way to fix the First Amendment to take the control away from the power elite?
Well, I think it's going to take a big overhaul. we have it drilled into us as part of our identity, this idea to say what we want. But we're also seeing that there need to be real limits to that, because that's causing a lot of problems. So I think what the Catholic Church offers, at least let me say it's doctrine, the Catholic doctrine offers, is that it offers a way by which speech can be properly ordered and regulated. That's intermarifica. And it allows it, because we have to understand why we're here. We have to understand some things are going too far. And we're seeing some things are going too far. People know that the COVID situation, it was wrong. It's not a question of we don't like that message. It's a question of that's wrong. People are seeing that with other things like this pushing the LGBTQ plus and CRT, it's wrong. It's wrong. It's not a question of other speech. It's right versus wrong. And they know that's wrong. And people, this is going against some very deep-seated feelings in people. And there was an American people before there was a First Amendment. So anything that destroys these people or is used to destroy these people, it has to be modified or changed.
Right. Yeah. It's I'm going to share something here if I can. See if this works. So this is just a little, graphic that I put together that kind of shows that, liberty in my frame, liberty is freedom that is constrained. And if you squeeze it down too much, you get oppression. And if you loosen it up, you get freedom. And that culture is actually, this is the Harvard business. I got this term from Clayton Christensen, who taught at Harvard Business School. Definition of the Harvard Business School definition of culture is the values and processes that are used to control an organization or a society. And so the way that I look at it, and this gets to the John Adams of it, that you've got this culture. And this could be Catholic doctrine. This could be, whatever it is that operates within this framework of liberty. And then the differences between the edges of the culture and the limits of the liberty are what I'm calling tolerance. But where it gets crazy and where it starts to get a little nuts, and I think that's what we're dealing with now, is that when you use freedom, or freedom of speech or freedom of, whatever crazy idea you want to come up with, and you push that past the bounds of liberty, that's when you get conflict. And that's but it's done on purpose. It's a Frankfurt School critical theory, deliberate attempt. But basically what you do is, if you want to destroy liberty, what you wind up doing is that you use freedom in order to push culture past the bounds of liberty in order to get a reaction. And the thing that I'm most concerned and worried about right now is the fact that I see good people who I like, who I'm friends with, who I agree with in principle on most things, falling for the reactionary bait. Going for the cheese on the mousetrap. I was on the steps of the Capitol on January 6th. I was there as a photographer with a credential. I took pictures of many of the agent provocateurs who were there, which is, I think, the primary reason that I've never been subpoenaed or anything. I provided all my pictures to the FBI through a intermediary the day after the thing. None of the people who I think were professional troublemakers, government hired professional troublemakers, have been indicted. But that I can tell you from being there that like 99% of the people there were like grandparents and people waving flags. The narrative that this was a some kind of a military coup or something. It would be the first military coup in history that had no weapons.
I think what you're also describing is political warfare by the elites against their own people. And they're doing it through the intel agencies, and they're doing it through the police agencies. But culture has also been weaponized against these same people. There are certain objective truths that we can all acknowledge and understand and live by. And that's the natural law. And that's something that people have always known over hundreds, thousands of years of human history. Like, having a family, educating and raising them, providing for them, public worship and honor of God, and having this extended family known as the ethnos or the nation protected, enriched, and not put at each other's throats, which is, what you're describing with January 6th. These people are being attacked. They're being turned on each other. They're being demonized. Now we've got a Newsweek report saying that the FBI may be watching half of the population because they're Trump supporters. And so you've got the culture wars, which by their nature are wars. So they, as you said earlier, they establish this position and they get people to go along with it. And the reason people go along with that position, like the reason they became hippies, I hope you weren't a hippie, was the reason they were hippies.
I was a little young, but
okay.
I wanted to be a hippie.
Oh, okay. Well, the hippies got the approval from the socioeconomic elites, and it came through Time magazine, and it came through Life, and it came through all these magazines. Hey, these are cool people. That's what you want. And everybody figures that out. Everybody figures that out in this society too. They figure out who the powerful are and what they're saying. You listen to the news for 30 seconds. And you will know, if you're an intelligent person, you will know what you're supposed to believe and what not, because you will tell, not just by what they say, but how they say it. And if you watch it on TV, it's the way they look at you. And it's the women with the voices. Oh, the way they modulate their voices and the way they look at you. And, they're telling you what to believe. In 90 seconds watching TV one night, the message I got was white people are bad. White men are the worst. LGBTQ is the way to go. That's in 90 seconds. It's in 90 seconds I got that message.
Yep. Well, Dave, I don't know if you've ever read anything by Dave McGowan. He wrote, I think, Weird Tales Inside the Canyon about Laurel Canyon. But his contention is that the hippies were a doctrinal warfare program.
I believe that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I did start reading his book. Yeah. I'm sorry. I drew a blank on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Stephen Stills, I think Stephen Stills grew up in a
military family.
Guatemala, Nicaragua, and South Vietnam before he became a guitar player. It's like, what was his father doing?
And the same with Jim Morrison.
Yeah.
That's right. All these guys were the sons of military or intel guys. And I think Zappia was too. And I think what McGowan says, you're right. What he says, they all died horrible deaths, and the counterculture was doctrinal warfare.
Right. So these were all kind of similar. These are all programs going on at the same time, which leads me to a question that I thought of after I finished the book. One of the things that I've learned from and by the way, I have your book on Kindle and I have it in hard copy. I like to, if I really like a book, I like to get as many copies of it, different versions of it as possible, because I like to be able to search. I like the search function.
I like that feature too.
I like holding a book and reading it, but I like being able to, if I remember something, I want to be able to go search for it. Avery Dulles is only mentioned in your book once, but Avery Dulles, from doing a little cursory background search, was at the same college as John Cortney Murray for, I think, at least 4 years. And so was there anything that you found out? Were there any connections there that didn't wind up in your 900-page book?
I found very little on Avery Dulles, but let me tell you, I mean, when I went to the archives, these are the Georgetown archive. By the way, the archivists there are fantastic people. All the archivists I dealt with at all the institutions I went to are fantastic. The people at the National Archives, we're getting our tax money worth, and so these are top-notch people, and I want that to be very clear. But before the documents of Murray get into the archives, somebody has to go through them. So, and I just got the sense looking at the loose correspondence file, there were only like 4 pieces of paper in there. One was about a Buick, 1951 Buick that Murray bought from Luce, and then there are a couple more about playing golf or something. I just looked at that and I said, I think something's missing. Now maybe somebody misplaced those. Don't know. So I didn't find a lot about Avery Dulles. However, Avery Dulles obviously was the son of, excuse me, of John Foster Dulles.
Yeah.
John Foster Dulles became Secretary of State. He was the brother of Allen Dulles, who was a CIA and a big spook during OSS. But John Foster Dulles,
and they were Presbyterians, right?
They were Presbyterians, and they were big into intercreedal cooperation. Big into that, which meant basically ecumenism, everybody coming together and fighting the tyrants, religions for freedom, right? Religions for freedom, which means everybody does their own thing, which is a form of doctrinal warfare. That's exactly right.
So you didn't find it, but it's not because you weren't looking. It's just there was nothing.
I wasn't specifically looking for Avery Dulles. I don't have a recollection of like looking for his file, but I just did not come across a lot that dealt with him and Murray. There might be some there, might be more there. I don't know, but I don't remember doing an in-depth search for that.
Yeah, because one of the things that the people who follow this channel do is that they connect the dots. They try to look at the metadata. So when I see that the nephew that Allen Dulles' nephew, John Foster Dulles' son, is at the same college as John Cortney Murray for 4 years during the kind of the peak of his activity in all of this. It makes me want to think my bias, my confirmation bias is that that Dulles must be doing his little puppet master thing here.
Well, I think that Murray knew which way the winds blew by 1943. Exactly how he came to that, I don't know. He's got a very cryptic entry in his diary. He says, "My kingdom is not of this world. What of my loyalty? To which kingdom? The kingdom of God is within you. Thy kingdom come. The kingdom of my fathers, Rex meos et Deus meos." It was very strange. Very, very strange entry. And that was about the time he got involved in intercreedal cooperation, which was John Foster Dulles and his efforts. So maybe there was a contact there with Avery. I mean, Avery surprised his family by becoming a Catholic. And to many, he appeared to be very traditional and became a cardinal.
Yeah, interesting. Claire Luce, just to get into the salacious supposition, I suppose. But she had a very cozy relationship with Murray. Just to catch you up on things that I talk about on this channel all the time, there's a CIA rubric that they use for controlling assets. And the rubric is money is mice, money, ideology, compromise, or ego. And the one thing that the CIA leaves out of their own rubric is family, because it turns out that family is a very powerful vector for being able to control people also. But do you think that there was kind of like a handler asset relationship between Claire Luce and Murray? Do you think that, he seemed to be very fond of her? And do you think that
they were very close. There's no doubt about that. Were they a handler or not? I don't know. Let me read something. They were very, very close. There's no doubt about that. Claire poured out her feelings for Murray, and she wrote once, quote, "When I can talk with you, the day has meaning. It stays alive. I don't lose altitude. I can stave off melancholy and futility. Eros, philia, agape, and certain other variations hard to categorize. You have been, are all of them, to me. I've been sick for such a long time. Could you ever know how much thou art to me?" End of quote. That's some pretty heartfelt, deep stuff between Murray and Luce. And he would sleep over at her place, but I couldn't find anything that says he was in the same bed with her. There was at least one instance where she observed him sleeping in bed, but there was no indication they were in the bed together, but there was a very close relationship there. Was she some kind of an asset? Well, I mean, her loyalty was to her husband,
Right.
and Harry was tied in with the American proposition. He was tied in with the Troika, with the deep state. I mean, he wasn't going to change that. So she was going to help him.
Right.
And that's why when it looked like they were going to divorce in 1959, Murray came to the rescue and kept them together. Had they divorced, history might be different today.
Interesting. So yeah, and I was looking at the pictures in your book too, and here's a picture of Murray, and it's dated May 62, and then it looks like from the same set there's a picture of Henry Luce, and it seems to me that Henry Luce took a picture of Murray, and Murray took a picture of Henry Luce while they were sitting there in the study.
Could very well be. They're in the same study. There's no doubt about that.
Right.
And remember, this is May 62. This is before Murray's been asked to go back to Vatican II. Vatican II starts in 4 or 5 months. And I'm sure they're talking about the program.
Right. Indeed.
By the way, Murray funneled information to Luce when Vatican II was ongoing, even though he had been told not to do that.
Right. And that's one of the things, and maybe we can jump to that question. Knowing what you know about the American proposition, doctrinal warfare program, and all of the players that were involved, because it was a program. It wasn't just one person doing something. There were coordinated things going on. And you mentioned the fact that during Vatican II, even though they said that nobody was supposed to talk to the media, there were leaks that were coming out every day, and then people were forced into a reaction situation where they had to respond to the leaks. Who do you think are there similar players that you can recognize now with the Synod and Synodality? People that remind you of Luce, or remind you of John Cortney Murray in the kind of pantheon of characters that are out there right now?
Let me give you a little background. Robert Blair Kaiser was the reporter for Time magazine. He started reporting on Vatican II in the fall of 62 until the fall of 63. I talked to him before he died. He said, we were all part of a conspiracy, he said. Everybody knew that. It was all part of a conspiracy to change doctrine. That's what he told me. Okay. And Fenton had identified this years earlier. He said there's a worldwide attack on doctrine. Okay. So let's talk about media guys. Media guys, reporters, they're spies. All right. Reporters and ambassadors are spies. Okay.
Well, it's a major vector for intelligence agencies. Right. Intelligence agencies, if you graduate from a major journalism school, the first people that are going to wind up offering to place you are probably intelligence people.
And they're going to be influencers too. That's right. They're going to be influencers. They're going to be people that people are going to hearken to and trust, and they're going to tell you what to think. So the media has traditionally been not a very good player, bad actor, if you want to put it that way. So are there bad actors right now dealing with the Synod? Oh, undoubtedly. Well, again, we're looking at what's going on through somebody else's eyes.
Right. So, but there's nobody that jumps out right at the moment that's popping up on your radar.
Nobody jumps out right now as I think about it. I'm just reading a lot of different accounts.
Right.
So I can't really name anybody.
Yeah, it's funny too, because there's been again, one of the things that I try to do is I try to back up from the news story and go, what's the message here? And it seems like the major theme that's coming out of the Vatican in all of the pre-synod releases and all of the information and a lot of the things that have been coming out to date are the word listening. I'm reminded of a book called Culture Code, where a psychiatrist who worked with the American intelligence and advertising businesses was always trying to reduce something down to one word. And the word that keeps coming out of the Vatican is listening, listening, listening. And the funny thing is about listening is that it's not possible. It's not possible to listen unless somebody else is talking. And so it seems to me that the reason that
you're awaiting orders. That's what it is.
Right. It seems to me that the word listen is being the listen drum is being pounded so loudly because they want people to just shut up and do what they're told. And that's the major frame that I see the first couple of days here.
Well, what you're seeing, that's right. That's very insightful. And you know what? We participated a little bit. We, meaning the people I live near, participated a little bit at the Synod about a year and a half ago or so when it started. And what they do is they put everybody in a room at the parish and they say, well, what's on your mind? What do you think of this? And well, obviously, you know, right away. Yeah, I went to one of those. I looked in. You could tell by the haircuts, the clothing, the facial expressions, who was who and what they were going to say. They were going to be loud and they were going to make sure it was going to get said. So there's an agenda here that's being advanced. And I think what's very important is in the Synod, we're seeing this dynamic where the church is now like America. Well, we got to listen to the people, right? Well, the problem with listening to the people is that a lot of times the powerful private interests, the rich guys sitting back in the corporate boardrooms are telling them what to say. And and it's coming out in a way that's not attributable.
They're hiring people who are very good speakers,
absolutely,
who are very good at making arguments.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is what C.D. Jackson said. He said, what you want to do is you want to get somebody in the crowd who's just going to repeat what we say in an effective way. And then all of a sudden he becomes a big loudspeaker and he's right next to you. Well, he's got to be credible. And you just put those around in enough places and enough people will follow. So Archbishop Aquila in May of 2021 from Denver, he nailed this thing. He nailed it. He said, he wrote a response to the German Synodal plan. And he stated that the church, quote, the church and the German Bishops' Assembly's views seem to be equally beholden to both the demands of the gospel and the standards of a pluralistic, open society in a democratic constitutional state. So you got the gospel, and then you got what the powerful private interests want you to believe. That's what he said in a nice way. And the powerful private interests go through Hollywood, the media, newspapers, whatever, because they control the culture. They can't be limited by the First Amendment and Supreme Court decisions that have expanded it. They can't be limited. So they're going to tell you what to think and how to get ahead and what everybody wants to hear. And they're going to make you believe that's what everybody wants. And Aquila figured it out. Or Aquila.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Hollywood. Again, one of the things that we talk about a lot here is things like predictive programming and things like that. And I was going to ask you, if there are any kind of big other things that kind of seem like obvious programs for doctrinal warfare. We mentioned the hippies and the hippie movement, but are there any other ones that you can think of? Off the top of your head?
Interracial justice and racial equality. That's a huge one right there. Right. That's huge. That started in the 1920s. And the people who started putting that out were the communists. And then, of course, the Jesuits picked that up. You can count on the Jesuits. And then the foundations ran with it, So who was driving that train?
Right.
I mean, the foundations and the big money. That's huge. And we're dealing with that today now. The natural consequence of those doctrinal weapons are CRT.
Right. And that's another interesting thing, too, that I think I was reading on the LaRouche website a couple of days ago. Now I'm getting the frog in my throat. I'm
sorry. I guess it's coming through the wires here.
Indeed. LaRouche, I think it was a guy named Robert Ingram. And I'm going to drink something. Here we go. He was talking about the concept of, these foundations go all the way back to Venice. And what they called the fondi. And the idea is that these foundations, they are all doctrinal. That is, they are giant pots of money that have a doctrinal agenda. And the way that they flow money into the society is in order to move the doctrine in the direction that they want to go in. They don't all agree with each other, but each one of them has their own doctrine that they're funding.
They all agree on one central point. And that is to make money and keep control of the upper 1/10 of 1%, or those good enough to get in. That's their common ground.
Yep. And other than that, all bets are off.
All bets are off. That's right.
let me see. I'm looking at my questions here, and I'm wondering I see there might be a question from. Nope, it's not a question. What is SOE? Somebody. What? Oh, Dave Underdown says Roald Dahl was assigned to poor. I'm going to take that off. All right. Let me see. Okay. Maybe what I'll do is I'll make my last question about your last paragraph in the book, which is the concluding paragraph of Appendix C succinctly encapsulates the essence of both volumes. It's really good, and I could probably go grab it and read the last paragraph of the book, but volume 1, volume 2, and it's and my question was, when I was reading it, because it's funny because we got all the way to the end of the book, and I got to the last paragraph of the last chapter, and I thought, that is really good. Why is it the last paragraph? So I'll read it. Here we go. Monsignor George Shea read Murray's article. In his typical thorough and categorical approach, he disputed the questions paragraph by paragraph, almost statement by statement. Murray's position, almost statement by statement, Murray's position. Reflecting on Murray's position and the latter's comments about public opinion and pressure, Shea wrote, the consular fathers should be, quote, all the more circumspect, lest they be guilty of bowing to non-Catholic public opinion. Indeed, non-Catholic opinion has never been regarded as the locus theologicus for Catholic doctrine, as a norm for determining truth of a teaching. Any sensus fidelum must include the bishops, but the bishops were divided on the issue of religious liberty, Shea wrote. Murray's reliance on biblical passages to support his view of religious freedom indicated to Shea that this was tantamount to holding that Leo XIII taught contrary to the Bible. The church's due for religious liberty comes from the fact that she is a divine institution and the state must recognize such. Murray's claim of universal recognition of a right to religious liberty was suspect itself, but further suspect was his claim. It arose from the natural law. After all, Shea asked, if it came from the natural law, why was it so late in coming? Finally, Shea made clear religious unity is a part of the common good. Now, I know that you mentioned that the natural law thing a few minutes ago, but I read that paragraph and I was thinking, why did he leave that to the end? Because is that the spoiler for people who would make it all the way to the last paragraph of the 900 pages?
You just spoiled it for everybody, Peter. That's it. That was it. I had to keep people reading to the end, I don't know. I think it reinforces a lot of what was going on throughout the book, that was said throughout the book. And I think that's why, it was there. And it was you leave with the refutation. That's an appendix. Leave with the refutation of Murray's position. I think the book, I think the book's a dangerous book.
Well, let's hope so. I mean, I have a house. I have a house full of dangerous books. Are you working on any dangerous books now?
Yeah, I am.
Dangerous books. Yeah,
I am. I am working on more dangerous books because this whole idea of doctrinal warfare is fascinating to me. This whole idea of the use of ideas, to subvert the natural law, what people naturally know, or to subvert revealed religion in the form of the Catholic Church, is a big deal. And we need to understand our times. And what we're being told, it does not explain our times. And I think that's the reason why people are kind of afraid of my book, except you, because you're a brave guy and you're a man who wants to know the truth, right? And
right.
And your staff and everyone else who follows you, they want to know the truth. They are brave people. And what this book does is it explains really what the Cold War was about. It explains what happened to the Catholic Church, which is continuing to today with the Synod, because this is just part of Americanization of the church. we got to go back to this constituency, see what they want to do. But the constituency is being told by other people what to think and say. But, it's also a very dangerous book because it shows what the real nature of the First Amendment and of the liberal ideology is, what it does. It puts power in the hands of people who you don't know, and they can cull the herd, and they're culling the herd, and they're turning us against each other. It's a huge doctrine. The liberal order is a huge doctrinal weapon itself, and it originated, with the English and the Dutch upper classes, as best as I can tell, as a way to keep power, knock out the kings, kind of float a lot of boats and make a lot of money. Okay, but that's why this is a troublesome book, and that's why a lot of Catholics don't like this book because it makes them feel bad. They want as Catholics, we're supposed to work towards the Catholic confessional state, where people are converted. The laws are based on divine positive law, at least on the natural law. But a lot of Catholics don't want to do that. They want to be able to do whatever they want to do. They want to be heroes. They want to write the last great American novel, And so what you have is a lot of people of all stripes, all types of life, love what you mentioned earlier, this action reaction, drop the water in the pond. Everybody makes money off of that one. Okay. Right. But is it really good for society? No.
Yeah, that's the question. So why do you think that that's part of the reason that, I went to, so there's a book section on the Duke Report. One of the things that people ask me is they ask me how I know the things that I know. And it turns out that there are legitimate journalists and academics out there in the world who have been writing about the New World Order, who have been writing about the power elite. In fact, C. Wright Mills wrote a book famously called The Power Elite. Eric Hoffer wrote The True Believer about populist movements and how they're managed and controlled. So none of these things are new, right?
No.
But they are occulted. They're hidden because they don't wind up on the New York Times bestseller list. And one of the things that I do when I put together a book page on the Duke Report is if I try to find any kind of videos or interviews with the authors. And I don't see a lot of David Wemhoff videos, even though I found out about your book from Jay Dyer. So shout out to Jay Dyer, because Jay Dyer, I think he's done at least 4 hours of analysis on your books. But Jay, have David on your show. James Corbett, Richard Grove. There's a lot of Ryan Christine. I mean, Whitney Webb comes out with 2 volumes of books, and she's on every alternative media outlet as a guest all of the time talking about her stuff. The Synod on Synodality is happening right now, and I would think that your dance card would be full right now. Why aren't people flocking to this book? Because it holds so many answers about what's going on right now. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that? Is it because you cough too much?
I think people, like I said, I think a lot of people consider it dangerous. A lot of the gatekeepers consider it dangerous because it's going to get people asking some serious questions about, the society we live in and who's really in charge. And I think that what a lot of these guys like is the confusion. A lot of these so-called thought leaders and chatterers like the confusion. They like their little area of the pie. They don't want people to see the big picture. My book helps people see the big picture, I believe, and it helps them to understand a lot of things. What America's really about, what happened to the church, and the Cold War.
All right. Well, with that, what I'm going to wrap up by telling people that here's the book, John Cortney Murray, Time, Life. Actually, here's the book. John Cortney Murray, Time, Life, and the American Proposition. It looks like a lot. I don't like. I'm totally intimidated by 900-page books, but I can tell you there's a lot of space in between the words. So, and it's incredibly well written. I think that it's a testament to the fact that you're an attorney, but your explanation of legalese and topics like natural law are written in a language that I think most people can understand.
I appreciate that, Peter. That's a very great compliment. Thank you.
Yep, you're very welcome. So if people want to learn more, I put the URL for your website, The American Proposition, directly below your beautiful photo image there. What if people go to that website? What will they find out?
They're going to find a whole series of articles I've written over the years based on what's happening and based on my understanding of events and my understanding of the Catholic faith in the areas of social teaching. I mean, lately my concern has been on, like I said, interracial justice and racial equality, because these have got suspicious beginnings in the society. There's something I want to clean up. I'm sorry.
No worries.
I said. You're very kind, but I said if you really want to kind of understand, there's three things this book tells people. It tells people what's happened to the church. The church was let's use the word colonized, controlled. A lot of the leadership accepted certain ways of thinking. They still carry that with them today. Catholic doctrine hasn't changed. It may have developed, but it's not contradicted. It's not supposed to be contradicted. But the leadership has become Americanist. This explains why the leadership is the way it is, and the church is messed up the way it is. The second thing is it explains the Cold War. And third thing is, I said America. It explains the First Amendment and the liberal order, because there's a lot that goes into America, and you have an American people. You've always had an American people, and it's always been fighting this ideology. There's always been this struggle in the American heart between the natural law and an ideology. And it's always going on. And that's what I get to see more and more of. So this book helps you understand really what, the First Amendment, the liberal order is about. It's about concentrating wealth and power in the hands of the few who are able to do it. And Michael Sandel wrote a book a couple years ago about the tyranny of the meritocracy. It's a great book. I mean, this is really explains the First Amendment and interracial justice and all that other stuff. It's culling the herd. It's Herbert Spencer's Survival of the Fittest. That's what it is. Who's best that we can use to help us.
I'm glad that you said Herbert Spencer's and not Charles Darwin's.
Oh, no. Herbert. Yeah, no. No, that's right.
Anyway, with that, I'm going to let you recover your voice, and I want to thank you for joining me here today. And maybe as the synod goes on and some more characters pop up, we might do this again if you're so disposed.
I'd be honored. I've really enjoyed talking to you, Peter. I want to thank you for having me on the show, and I've thoroughly enjoyed what we did today. And call me anytime. I'm glad to come back.
All right, terrific. So everybody go out and get that book, because it's if you're interested at all in what's going on in the synod right now, I think that it'll give you some clues on what you should be looking for as far as the doctrinal warfare is concerned.
And what I say and what I write is different, but I think it's a difference that matters.
Indeed. All right, thank you, David. We'll talk to you again. Bye-bye.